folks. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to you about swing. Swing is a crucial component of many forms of American popular and vernacular music, but it's not that well understood, and it's rarely taught in any kind of specificity. When I studied jazz as a college student, the professor said, okay, swing is very important, but I can't explain it. No one can. You got to just feel it. And I've heard that same sentiment repeated many times. There's an element of that that's true. It's something that you have to learn by ear. It's something that you have to feel in your body. It's not something that can be verbalized easily.
It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. It don't mean a thing. All you gotta do is sing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah.
Thanks to the computer, it's also possible now to talk about swing numerically and visually, to see it on the screen and do all these other manipulations. And so in the past few years, there's started to be some musicology about swing. I know you might be feeling some resistance to the idea of expressing something as emotional and ineffable as swing in terms of numbers. But thinking about it in these kind of numerical quantitative terms is a really useful window into this larger complexity of it as it exists in actual music. Before we get into all the technical specifics, it's helpful to listen to some music that has swing in it, and it's even more helpful to compare the same piece of music without swing and then with swing. First, we're going to listen to The Dance of the Sugar-Plum Fairy by Tchaikovsky from the Nutcracker Suite. And now check out Sugar Rum Cherry by Duke Ellington. For another comparison, here is Johann Sebastian Bach's Concerto for Two Violins in D minor. And here's that same piece of music played by Django Reinhardt, Stéphane Grappelli, and Eddie South. Okay, so you should have no trouble telling the difference between the versions of those pieces of music, but what exactly is going on rhythmically? In order to answer that question, we need some rhythm vocabulary. Most Western music is organized around beats. Here are some beats in 4/4 time, which is the most common time signature in Anglo-American popular music. So we count the beats 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of those beats is a quarter note. There's 4 of them in a measure. And you can divide the quarter notes into eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The first eighth note in each pair is called the on-beat subdivision. The second eighth note in each pair is called the off-beat subdivision. When you swing, you are lengthening the on-beat subdivisions and shortening the off-beat subdivisions. That doesn't sound that complicated. Now, to swing well, there's more to it than just the timing of your notes. There's also some considerations around dynamics and articulation. But yeah, the main thing really is just making your on beats longer and your off beats shorter. Listen to this drum machine pattern. With each repetition, the on beat subdivisions are going to get a little longer and the off beat subdivisions are going to get a little shorter. You may have seen it said somewhere that swing is triplets. It's very common to notate swing by writing a pair of eighth notes equals a pair of tied triplets and then another triplet. Triplets are one kind of swing, but one among many, 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 many different kinds. Saying that swing is triplets is a little bit like saying that colors are blue. Like, well, one of the colors is, but meanwhile, there are all the other colors. In reality, you can have any ratio of length between your onbeat and your offbeat subdivisions. There are a couple of different ways to describe these ratios. The way that drum machine and DAW designers usually do it is with this percentage system that was developed by Roger Linn, the designer of the Linn drum. So in Roger Linn's system, you use percentages that describe the length of the onbeat subdivision. In straight time, the onbeat subdivision is 50% of the beat. If you're going to have triplet swing, that means that the onbeat subdivision is twice as long as the offbeat subdivision. It means that the onbeat subdivision is taking up 2/3 of the beat. So triplet swing is 66.6% swing or 67% swing. Most Anglo-American popular music uses a swing ratio somewhere between 50 and 66. You can go higher. It happens occasionally, but it's pretty rare. Here is a drum machine beat using straight time, 50% swing. Here's that same beat using 57% swing. That same beat using 61% swing. And that same beat using 66% swing. If swing is a phenomenon that's happening at the eighth note level, at the subdivision level, what if you're just playing quarter notes? So for example, in jazz, walking bass is just quarter notes. Doom, 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 right? Does that mean that it's not important for jazz bass players to swing? No, absolutely not. It's crucial for jazz bass players to be able to swing. But how can they swing if they're just playing quarter notes and not playing any notes on the offbeats? Well, it turns out it's not just the beginning of your notes that matters. It also matters when your notes end. Here's a melody in quarter notes played in straight time. And here's that same melody with swing. And I've made sure that the notes end exactly at the place where the onbeat subdivision ends. So the beginnings of the notes are just on the onbeats, but the ends of the notes are timed exactly so that the ends swing. This is a really underappreciated aspect of musical timekeeping in general. It's not enough to have your notes start on time. You also have to be intentional about when they end. Let's listen to some examples of eighth note swing. First, here's It Serves You Right to Suffer by John Lee Hooker. Like many blues songs, this uses triplet feel, or sometimes called 12/8 feel. Da, 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... Here's the Duke Ellington Orchestra playing the Overture from the Nutcracker Suite from the same album as Sugar-Plum Cherry. This is a great example of big band era, more traditional jazz swing, the kind that you would play for people to dance to. Here's a more modern jazz form of swing. This is Contemplation by McCoy Tyner with drums by Elvin Jones. this is not really music to dance to. This is music to sit and listen to with your complete attention. Elvin is playing a lot more unpredictably, like he's swinging, but it's not like the same kind of steady metronomic pulse that we heard in Duke Ellington. And he's mixing in more triplets, some dragged rhythms, even some straight time. It's more complex and less predictable. Now, we customarily associate swing with jazz, but you may be surprised to learn that swing is also a really important feature of country music. Here's Hank Williams with Lovesick Blues.
I got a feeling of the blues, oh Lord, since my baby said goodbye. Lord, I don't know what I'll do. All I do is sit and sigh. Oh Lord, that last long day, she said.
This is not as elegant or smooth or tight as Duke Ellington, but it is still swing. And in fact, there is an entire subgenre of country music called Western swing, as exemplified by Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys.
Yeah, Alex.
They're really basically just playing jazz, but as country musicians. So far in this episode, I've only been talking about eighth note swing, but in about 1960, a really significant thing happened in American popular music. People started keeping their eighth notes straight, but swinging their 16th notes. So that means instead of stretching and shrinking their onbeat and offbeat eighth notes, they kept those straight, they kept them even, but they started stretching and shrinking their 16th notes. So it's exactly the same idea, it's just happening at a lower level of subdivision. Here is a drum machine pattern that I made using straight 16th notes. Here's that same pattern using 57% 16th note swing. Here's the pattern with 61% 16th note swing. And here's the pattern with 66% 16th note swing. So you use eighth note swing in jazz, older forms of country, early rock and roll, blues, but you use 16th note swing in funk, in later forms of R&B, later forms of rock, in hip hop, in dance music, in most current American pop. Here's a classic example of 16th note swing. This is Superstition by Stevie Wonder, and Stevie himself is playing these drums. Here's a more subtle 16th note swing, a narrower swing ratio. This is God Make Me Funky by the Headhunters. This next beat is The Funky Drummer. It's a very frequently used sample from James Brown's song The Funky Drummer Parts 1 and 2. The drummer is Clyde Stubblefield. And his swing is very light, like it's almost even, but yeah, without the swing, this beat would lose its power. But there's a lot more going on in this beat other than just swing. There are all kinds of little micro-rhythmic deviations from the perfect metronomic grid. So for example, that first snare drum hit in the pattern is substantially late, and a bunch of the hi-hats are dragged a little bit. Clyde Stubblefield is rushing and dragging a little bit, and all human performers do, but Clyde is actually pushing and pulling against the tempo pretty noticeably. I overlaid steady eighth notes against this pattern, and you can hear for yourself. to really drive home how important Clyde Stubblefield's microrhythmic fluctuations are to his time feel, I've quantized the funky drummer exactly to the straight 16th note grid. Okay, so that's pretty awful. Now what I've done is added some light 16th note swing from the computer. Okay, that's a little bit more musical, but it's still definitely lacking in vibe. Here's the original again. Now, this doesn't mean that perfect metronomic robotic swing necessarily has to sound bad. Here's What Have You Done For Me Lately by Janet Jackson, produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. This is all programmed. There are no human performers on this at all. And I would say it swings pretty hard. It's a really nice groove. In the past few years, as musicologists have started using digital tools to investigate swing at a larger scale and more systematically, they're starting to discover that there is a lot more to it than just stretching and shrinking the subdivisions. So, for example, Milton Mermikides did a study of John Coltrane's music in which he discovered that John Coltrane swings by a different amount from his rhythm section. If he's playing with Elvin Jones, Elvin tends to be using a pretty wide swing ratio. Coltrane tends to be playing a lot more straight. And that would seem like it would not be a recipe for a good groove. It seems like they would conflict with each other. But what Coltrane does is he plays late. He plays substantially behind the beat. So what that means is that his offbeats actually line up with Elvin's offbeats. Milton Mermikides cites as an example Train's Slow Blues. You can listen to that now. Here's the little melody played in straight eighth notes. Here's that same melody delayed. And now I've added 66% swing to the drum machine. The melody is still straight, but now it's late, so that all of its offbeats are lined up with the offbeats in the drums. Obviously, that doesn't sound as good as when Coltrane does it, because Coltrane's time is a lot more flexible and nuanced and reactive to the other musicians, but hopefully it gives you some idea of what's happening in his playing. Humans don't swing like robots. Humans don't swing like drum machines. Jazz musicians will vary their swing ratio from one measure to the next or even one beat to the next. Different members of a band will swing by different amounts. The Coltrane straight and late phenomenon is just one example out of uncountably many. Sometimes New Orleans pianists will swing by different amounts in their left hand and their right hand. Drummers will sometimes swing in different amounts on the snare drum versus on the cymbals. It gets to be very complicated. I'm going to finish this episode by talking a little bit about the music of Jay Dilla. Here's a song by Slum Village called Get This Money, which Dilla produced. Okay, what is that? I mean, is that swing or is that groove? What is that? Is it off? Dan Charnas, my man Dan Charnas, wrote a book called Dilla Time, and it's a must-read. I recommend it. And he uses the phrase Dilla Time to describe this very specific J Dilla time feel. The conventional way to explain J Dilla's music is to say that it's unquantized. And what Dan Charnas explains in his book is that that is not true. Everything in Dilla's music is quantized very precisely. One of the things that's happening in Get This Money is the snare drums, the claps, are very early. And because they're the loudest and clearest thing in the beat, your ear just kind of orients itself around them, and that creates the illusion that everything else is dragging behind. That's what gives the music its kind of limping feel. And then the synth bass that Dilla programmed in is also just way behind the beat, very, very late. And the hi-hats drag a little bit. Everything drags by different amounts, but it's not random and it's not sloppy. He's placing these things on the grid precisely, just not conventionally. Here's a more complex Dilla beat. This is called Bars and Twists. I don't know everything that's happening in this beat. Dan Charnas explains that Dilla would layer different amounts of swing onto different elements of the same beat. So you might have one layer that's swung, one layer that's straight, one layer that's perfectly quantized on the 16th note grid, one that's quantized but behind. Like all of these things kind of fighting with each other. It's the rhythmic equivalent of harmonic dissonance. And there's an important difference between this and just sloppiness. Like we've all heard sloppy timekeeping. That's not what this is. The interaction between this kind of micro-timing and the phenomenon of swing, I mean, we're just barely starting to have the vocabulary for it. Now, for sure, if you want to learn about these things, the best thing to do is just listen to the music, right? Practice your instrument or sing along with the music. But I also think it's helpful to bring these things into the computer and just look at them, right? It's very enlightening to bring a piece of audio into Ableton Live, line it up with the grid, and then just see, where do the snare drums fall? Where do the hi-hats fall? Where do the kick drums fall? What can you learn by having your eyes assist your ears? Also, what can you learn by slowing stuff down? What can you learn by putting a metronome on top of something? That's no substitute for feeling these things in your body and hearing them in your ears, but there are definitely a lot more paths up the mountain of being able to feel swing. And I think that's pretty cool. Thank you very much for listening.
It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do why